I know, I know, I know. I bet I know what you are all thinking right now. What in the ever-living hell could this guy possibly think is a good reason for why Call of Duty as a franchise should go to the World War I era? I'll tell you something, right now, with where Call of Duty as a franchise is with how many times it repeats settings, I think that this time setting and period in our collective history as a species should definitely be explored, only because of the fact that, for one, Call of Duty has yet to do World War I, but also there are so many examples of World War I being explored in entertainment through other areas of media, such as television and movies, that could showcase what a good video game from Call of Duty could look like. And on top of that, there is also an example of a video game that I love very dearly and will use to describe why I believe this is the case. Again, I know how crazy this sounds, but honestly, why not have a fun discussion about the potential possibility of this franchise exploring this era? Hear me out and then let me know how you feel after you've finished this video. If this video can get 30 likes, I'd very much appreciate that. So firstly, let's talk about my inspiration for this video. World War I as a time period in terms of entertainment perspective has given us some really great storytelling throughout many different forms of entertainment media. My favorite war film of all time is from the World War I era, and that is 1917. All Quiet on the Western Front is also one of the most classic films ever created, whether it's the original or it's the new one. But then, in my opinion, when we are talking about gaming, you have the crowning jewel of them all for me. It is a little video game called Battlefield 1. Not only is it my favorite Battlefield game ever, but is also one of my favorite video games of all time regardless of the genre. I actually personally think it might be the greatest war game ever made if I want to go that far. And we are going to use this game as the main template for why I believe Call of Duty could do a World War I game. Battlefield 1, by every sense of the word, is one of the most fun games I have ever had a chance to play, and I have played many video games in my time. For a first-person shooter perspective, I would easily say that it is in my top 3 for me. To this day, I am still so shocked that a game like this was able to do as well, and it was loved as it was, considering for a lot of people, I would have imagined that it would have been the one Battlefield game that people would have liked the least, especially given the time period it is set in and how that could have been a turnoff for people, but not for me and many others out there who have played the game. It had a great set of campaign stories and a fantastic and awesome multiplayer mode. I also find that World War I has given us some of the best music I have ever heard in my life. Whether it be 1917, All Quiet on the Western Front, or Battlefield 1, the music from these different pieces of entertainment media have just been inspirational and emotional. If you haven't gotten a chance to listen to the soundtrack of either of those three, do yourself a favor and go and listen to them right now. Call of Duty is no stranger to good music, and I definitely think they could add to that list. Of course, you have the microtransactions in Battlefield 1, which in my opinion were probably the only main downside to the game, but other than that, the game is in my opinion almost flawless. It is beautiful, haunting, and again, as I've said many times, truly one of the most fun experiences you could ever have. And for those wondering, I don't want you to get it twisted in any way. If Call of Duty were to ever explore World War I, it would only have to be for one game and one game only. There would simply be no reason for them to make another one after that. Granted, they have made 7 World War II games, so who really knows, to be honest, at this point, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. This would be a one and done, and then you would move on and do something else. Campaign and story mode wise, it would be a very interesting place to start for the main crux of this video discussion and commentary. I think that World War I is ripe for such great storytelling, and again, as I've mentioned already, has already given us so many great stories throughout entertainment. In terms of recent examples, for video game wise, Battlefield 1 had a very good campaign. I loved playing those stories when the game first came out. The emotion really consumed me for just how great they were told and through the gameplay as well. In terms of movies, we got 2 examples with the films like the new version of All Quiet on the Western Front from Netflix, and then my personal favorite war film of all time in 1917, as I've said already. I love both of these movies so much, and were just great pieces of storytelling. If anybody here hasn't seen one or both of the films, I highly recommend you put it on your list at the top. Tying this back into Call of Duty, we know that this franchise is known for having a great campaign from multiple different games. The game that I think in my mind would be a great example to pair this with in terms of how emotional and haunting it was would be World at War. World at War to this day, in my opinion, atmospherically might be the best COD game we've ever had, even if other functions of the game weren't perfect in other modes. The campaign is just off the charts good in terms of its emotional storytelling when taking us through the events of the World War II time period in both the European and Pacific theaters. A World War I game has the chance to do this too. Both wars were extremely terrifying and haunting. Now, of course, this is a Treyarch game, World at War, and if I'm being totally honest, I think that the one studio I would prefer to handle a World War I game would be Treyarch. They tend to make games that are much more darker and of that tone. Just look at the Black Ops series as well, apart from World at War. They are the perfect and best choice for it. In terms of the story, I wouldn't expect them to follow a true story event around a real person who existed through the war. The way Battlefield 1 did it, it was that the character stories were fictional, but the settings and events were based on real things that happened during the war. I think that's pretty much the safe way to go about it here with Call of Duty, unless they find that there is a story that they want to tell around a real person or a real event. And we are just talking about the general idea that a World War I story needs to be told for Call of Duty. I just think that this time period, it needed to be explored a lot more. Call of Duty would just add itself into that echelon of many different stories. It is a time period that I feel we are losing our grasp on in terms of really honing in on the history of what it did to the world. Pretty much everyone who is around during that time is now dead, and so it feels necessary that we keep that history in line by continuing to tell stories of what had happened. Multiplayer is an interesting conversation, and one I think everyone should hear me out on before commenting. Just by looking at a game like Battlefield 1, it is very obvious that a multiplayer mode can be made out of World War I. There are plenty of guns to go around for people to use. I mean, if you just do some research and look up how many were used during the war by different factions, it is quite impressive just how many there are. Now, in the case of Call of Duty's style of gameplay, they obviously would not include every single one. They aren't going to take the Battlefield 1 route and just put dozens and dozens and dozens of kinds of guns into the game, because that would feel a little copycat-like. Call of Duty would have to limit what is used, of course. Now, I'm definitely not going to go through every single gun's history and tell you all of which should be used in the game, because that would take a lot of time, but just know that there are enough to be used. World War I is also no stranger to tacticals and lethals in terms of grenades. They would obviously be limited because flash grenades didn't exist at the time until after World War II. So you would have smoke grenades, your lethal regular grenades, incendiaries, gas grenades as well. I assume some type of landmine, bouncing Betty type lethal as well. So again, from a weapon perspective, you have enough there to work with. From another point of view, whether it's score streaks or kill streaks, that is something I think a lot of people would be interested in to know what could be used. Most COD games after Call of Duty 4 went down the route of putting in around 15 to 20 streaks to use. Recon planes can act as a UAV, you can have a care package streak, fighter planes can act as a way to gun down a certain area like the fighter pilots in COD World War II, bombers to bomb certain areas on a map, flamethrowers, artillery strikes, flak guns can act as like a counter UAV style streak, incendiary bombers. You can also have some more powerful streaks as well that pertain to the time period, such as a really heavily armored juggernaut, a mustard gas type streak that could last for a long time after spreading through the map, and then maybe I would say the biggest streak in the entire game would probably be a Zeppelin blimp. Battlefield 1 already showcased that is a very powerful thing to use in the game, and so that would probably be the big streak of them all. It's almost kind of like the mothership streak that you see in Black Ops 3, and just for those wondering, this would have a time limit. This is not going to be like Battlefield 1, where you can use it for an unlimited amount of time until somebody shoots it down, of course. So right there off the bat, I listed about 10 or so ideas, and I think there's definitely other areas that we could look to see what else could be built around a streak. From this perspective, I would also say that the streaks in this game would feel the most similar to a game probably like Call of Duty World at War and World War II. It's a system in the game that would not be perfect by any means, but it is still something there to use. In terms of the actual systems that come with the stuff like the class setup and attachments, I would personally take it back to the old school style of doing it. Now again, from an attachment perspective, knowing this time period, there's definitely going to be some limits. However, there's no harm in taking some liberties with certain areas. I'd say that the areas that make sense to have an attachment for would be the reticle, a grip, the stock, the barrel, scopes for snipers, a silencer, the magazines, an underbarrel attachment, and that would pretty much be it. I would also not go super crazy here with the gunsmith type of stuff, like just make it one attachment and one attachment only, and it would probably go into a pick 10 style system, which now leads us into the perk side of things. For the most part, I'd bring back the usual style perks that we are accustomed to, and maybe add in a few new ones as well along the way. I'm not quite sure about that part yet. I think that one would still need some tinkering too. Maybe bring back the wildcard system as well, well for adding an extra perk or an extra attachment or an extra lethal. I'm pretty much summarizing the basics behind how the system would work as somebody who is more loving to the old school ways of how multiplayer systems were working. In terms of customization, I'd also again bring back calling cards, camos, and any other fun community systems that can be put in place. I would absolutely not be doing skins for this game because, in my opinion, skins, bundles, and emotes and all that other crap have no reason to be in a game like this. It would also be a earned-based system where you'd have to complete challenges and do other things to actually earn this stuff instead of just paying for it. From a map perspective, there are so many different locations that we can choose from to make maps out of. World War I affected areas such as Europe, the Middle East, Africa, the Pacific, and even parts of Asia. For those wondering, I would absolutely do my best to make sure that the maps did have a mix of color, but also there are parts of some of the maps where it just needs to be a little darker and dreary. I of course would not make every single map like that. I think that would be a very bad mistake. There were many beautiful places that were affected by the war, and so you have to let that shine as well. Again, just look at a game like Battlefield 1. Not every map was succumbed to the fact that it needed to be dark and gray in color. You can definitely have different variations of both. So basically from a multiplayer perspective, that is the grounds of which a game like this would look like. I'd be very curious to know how you all feel about what it is that I just talked about with regards to what would easily be the game's most important feature, which is the multiplayer. It is now time to move on to the last part of what a World War game would look like, and this is of course with its third mode, and yes, you already know that there's only one direction this can go in. It's not Spec Ops, and it is certainly not Extinction, even if we think that that might be the route to go down. It is of course zombies. Especially considering the fact that the one studio I want this game to be made by would be Treyarch. They are of course known for zombies, so the zombies mode would be easily the way to go down. From my point of view, again, you would have to bring this back to the traditional style of zombies. I would use character crews for a story, bring back some old school style Easter eggs, and then I would also be bringing back maybe the most important part, which is round-based zombies. All this combined could be really good for this mode. From a crew perspective, for those wondering how it would work, there are many different ways that this can be done. I would probably go down the premise crew route, where you'd have one of each of the four characters represent a different theater of the war. So you would have someone from the Western Front in Germany or from France to represent the French. You could do somebody from the Middle Eastern part, even Australia, and Russia can also have some ties as well. For the most part, I'd say a lot of the characters would be guys, but from the Russian perspective, or even the Middle Eastern one, you can bring in some Russian female snipers, or also some Middle Eastern women as well. I think there's definitely a route to go down with that. This was a thing that did happen in World War I, and so from that perspective, I would say that again, I would take the premise crew route and just make everyone unique to themselves. I would definitely build on some new type of story that is central only to this game when we are talking about every new map that comes out. DLC would be a very important part of this game in order to add new locations and maps in. Zombies in Call of Duty is also no stranger to the World War I aesthetic. The map Origins is the one and only one that's done it, but knowing how it's designed through its layout, you can easily do something here. World War I did not only take place in the trenches, and so again, there are many diverse locations that can be used to create some really cool and interesting maps for zombies. As a way to kind of close out this video and give my final thoughts, I feel like a lot of people would think that this time period can limit so much of what you can do, but in actuality, when you do some research, you'll find that there is way more to it than you realized. World War I was a lot more expansive than you thought, and so again, this is one of the other reasons why I think this would lean to Call of Duty making one game and one game only out of this era. I also know some people would get annoyed by the fact that we would even have to go here considering how many times, 7 to be precise, that we have gone to World War II. The way to drive the narrative forward for marketing purposes and just in general for this game is to make sure that people know that this would be the only time that we do this, and they would be in the hands of a studio in Treyarch who have done World War II very well and can do another World War game right. You also have to drive the passion forward to the fans to let them know that this is a very passionate project to work on and that it is going to feel like a Call of Duty game. After all, Call of Duty did start with the World Wars. It did start with World War II and only expanded way after that when it first started. It feels like this would take it back to what it means to be the name Call of Duty. Trust me, if the game were to look like the Call of Duty games of new that we get nowadays, it would absolutely not work, but it absolutely could if we drive forward the notion that it would be a very fun game but also an emotional one when looking at certain areas. To recognize that history and to also recognize that this is an era that you could absolutely make a fun video game out of. To this day, I honestly never thought Battlefield 1 could have worked, when it originally came out, but it is probably my favorite game in that franchise. They somehow found a way to make that time period so loved by many gamers out there. I think Call of Duty could definitely do it if it were to be done right. But enough from my passionate ramble here. I think I'm going to close this video off by telling you all to please comment down below your thoughts on everything that I discussed here today in this video. Do you agree with a lot of what I said, or do you disagree on certain areas? And if you do, please be able to communicate that respectfully to me in the comments. If you did enjoy this video, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new here. My next goal is to reach 3,000 subscribers, so your support would be very appreciated. I hope everyone here has a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you all soon for another video. This is Orion, signing out.